You already learned about using for loops to execute the same piece of code multiple times. Another way to do the same thing is using a while loop. A while loop is very similar to a for loop, except that it repeats while some condition is true, instead of repeating once for each element in a list. You write it as while some condition is true, and then the body of the code that you want to execute. Many programs can be written using either for loops or while loops. For instance, factorial can be written with both. Here is the for loop factorial code, which you looked at earlier. And here is the same thing with a while loop. We see that we once again start with an answer equal to 1, and then, while n, our counting variable, is greater than 0, we multiply answer by n and decrement n. This will serve to give us n times n minus 1 times n minus 2, all the way down to where n is equal to 1. For factorial, the two different versions are pretty interchangeable, but there are some situations where a while loop or a for loop is clearly better. For instance, suppose you don't know how many times a loop is going to need to run to finish a task. Then, a while loop is a better choice, because you don't have to worry about that. You just have to test a condition to see whether the task is finished. A great example of a program that uses while loops is the guess function. In this function, a random number between 0 and 100 is chosen, and then the user inputs guesses until they reach the correct number. While the guesses are not equal to the random number, the program prints an output that tells them if they are too high, too low, or have won. We don't know how many guesses they need, so a for loop wouldn't work. Now, pause the video and see if you can write this function yourself using while loops. Okay, let's look at the program we wrote to do this. First, we defined our random number as something between 0 and 100. Our while loop executes while guess is not equal to the random number. So, we start guessNum at something that random num can never be, -1. Then, for each iteration of the loop, we take the user's guess as an input, assign that input to guessNum, and then output a message based on that input. Let's run this code with some extra print statements and see what happens. We're going to add a print statement to print what the random number is. Okay, so our random number is 35. Let's see if what happens if we guess something lower than that. Tells us too low. If we guess something higher, too high. And if we guess the correct thing, you got it and our program ends, because the while loop will exit when the condition is no longer true. One thing to note is that if the condition is always true, the while loop will run forever in an infinite loop, so you definitely want to watch out for that when you're writing a program, and make sure you write a while loop that will actually finish. You now know two ways to loop, either using a for loop, which executes some number of times, or a while loop, which executes while a condition is true. Both excel in certain situations. In general, if you know the number of times you want to loop, pick a for loop. If you have some condition you are checking with each iteration, pick a while loop.